Okay, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
POIs in the chat, please. Also, thank you, Umar. It's been a good run. Uh, Three, two, one. Now, I think opening government neglects significantly how brutal the state of nature necessarily is. You wake up every day not knowing whether or not you'll be able to put food on the table because it's not every day that the antelope comes scurrying to your tribe. You wake up every day not knowing whether or not you're going to be devoured or whether or not a drought is going to happen or be afflicted to your tribe that leaves you with nothing to spare. That is the comparative Gov has to defend. I think they neglect this to a significant extent. First, I'm just going to flip the vast majority of what OG says very quickly. Their analysis here is quite simple, right? They say, one, that groups will still exist as tribes, and they give a bunch of mechanisms as to why people are inherently evil, and because they form in groups, these in groups will fight other in groups. But guys, when you build tribes, those in groups also fucking exist. And here's where I break the deadlock and prove why conflict is likely you're on their side of the house. It's because there are finite numbers of resources. You have the uncertainty of not knowing whether or not you'll be waking up to enough crops to survive the next day, which means these people have to proactively seek out other tribes and proactively have to fight each other in order to hold on to what is very little of left. On our side of the house, this is much simpler because the industrial revolution has passed. You have to figure out ways to have some extent of self-subsistence. So even if it were the case, so you do things like save seeds for the next harvesting season, so you know and have some extent of stability. And this is what drives humans to create the most amount of conflicts on their side of the house, because they have fight or flight reactions that oftentimes result in them because they are uncertain of their future, trying to do things that proactively create some sense of stability, and oftentimes that ends up in a degree of conflict. No, thank you, Pjotr. Okay, I'm going to first explain what the veil of ignorance does, and this is the first place in my setup. We don't have to defend the lowest common denominators, and the only analysis that the PM gives here is sure, some places in the earth are really, really bad within the status quo. Sure, but I think this is relatively unlikely, and this is not our burden. Our burden is just to prove like the average individual that is born in today's society or in civilization is likely to be relatively well off. There's a 0.1% chance you get born as a Uyghur Muslim in China or as a queer person in the radical Islamic State. But the second thing of setup here, I'm just going to explain what changes and what doesn't change. I think a lot of problems associated with civilization are still associated with pre-civilization societies, and this makes Gulf Bench uncomparative, as I've already explained to you before. Tribes still have hierarchies, and this is a very fundamental piece of human nature that you cannot eradicate even if you eradicate civilization. In fact, what makes us humans are laws, because we can do things like be in accordance with each other. We can agree upon common sets of principles not to break because we are socialized into believing that those principles are bad when we break that there are punishments such as jail, etc., which at least, the very least, provides us to skirt away to some degree from worse off impulses. Whereas on their side of the house, when they conceded that there will still be groups that are formed, and when we still, it's probably still true that people crave things like social approval and power on either side of the house because these are very fundamental human instincts. That's the point to which conflict actually becomes worse on their side of the house. But the third thing I'm going to explain here is what the state of nature is, and this alludes to our first argument on why utilitarianism and safety is just generally a good thing. I think there are three distinct characterizations that are exclusive to the state of nature and not present in modern society. One, it is certainty. On their side of the house, this is because you have not yet figured out self-sufficiency. You have not yet figured out the industrial revolution. This means you don't know what is the next time you can have food. You run scared. Comparatively, even within the status quo, or even if we go back some amount of time, but the premise is always to defend is that civilization exists. Most of the world has access to sustainable sources of food and water. This is empirically true, but the structural reason here is also because there's high degrees of resource trading between countries, which means economic dependency, and this is also exclusive as we get continuously further into the future, where countries continuously try to build more developed and advanced machinery that depends on more countries for things like parts and extraction, means they cannot attack each other for resources. This is why you have NAFTA. This is why you have BRICS. This is why you have the EU within the status quo. But the second thing that is exclusive is also safety. You don't know when the next day you'll be alive is. On our side of the house, you at the very least have clothes. You have a bed. Most shelter and houses within the status quo have been built to overcome tsunamis and earthquakes, whereas you run scared on their side of the house. And third, I think this is quite funny, there are stimulants for happiness. On our side of the house, you can smoke and drink. There are mechanisms to deal with modern day problems that exist, even if it were the case that you were born in the worst off places in society. On their side of the house, it doesn't exist. You can be born in a barren desert, and there's literally zero degree of control you have over your surroundings. I posit humans care about this to a pretty great degree as well. Before I move on, CG.
What's so bad of being eaten by a lion?
Um, well, one, you die or you're painful. Maybe sometimes the lion doesn't eat you, but you feel extreme amounts of agony when you've been bitten by something. Presumably, you've been injured to some degree in your life and can already quantify in your head how painful this is. But secondly, at best, this is death, right? But whereas on an Austrian golf bench, if you're trying to explain why conflict and war will happen, why death one way is likely to be more important than death in another way, so clearly this just isn't the metric for the debate. Okay, why is utilitarianism good? For a bunch of reasons that I've already told you. Also, current life is relatively fine. You have political autonomy, and this is likely as people go on. Because one, challengers or successors can rival supporters to overthrow you within societies, and people in positions of power care about this. This is not just exclusive to democracies. It's a very simple basis of the person in power wants to stay in power, and the easiest way to do this is to appease people such that they do not backlash and overthrow. But second, that people exercise their revealed preferences because they still care about what they want. Because the pain of not being able to exercise your political autonomy or the pain of being in slavery is something that is immensely painful for somebody who is not able to exercise their autonomy because they see it as an extension of themselves. This is also the point to which you do things like go out and protest. You push back against this, which is why even in the status quo, we live through things such as the civil rights movement, such as the suffragettes movement, which makes people necessarily better. But the second thing here is that technology has improved. The reason for this is what I explained already. But the third thing I want to explain here is even if the state is bad, you have structures that still give you immutable amounts of happiness. That is, you have family, you have religion, and this is important because even if it were the case that Gov will try to symmetricize this and say, you still have family on Gov, it's not the same. Even if this is symmetrical, you need a place to exercise this. You feel significantly better when you have a house that is not necessarily limited to being tarnished and being like pillaged by the next tsunami. You feel significantly better when you have a temple to practice your religion because that gives you spiritual happiness. And this is really important and outweighs even the best case on Gov. I'm just going to explain right now why utilitarianism or safety is something people care to a much higher degree than any degree of autonomy that you get from Gov bench. One, because being able to exercise your range of options has a capacity problem from all of Gov bench. In order to have autonomy, you must be able to exercise your preferences off that option. This is why even if there's a terrorist running around the streets, even if you told me I'm free to run as far as I want to, I will not leave my house because I am scared for myself, because I can visualize how painful it is. And this is the veil of ignorance, right? You generally know what society standards are and what society looks like, but you have no control of who you are born in society. On their side of the house, everybody experiences these same traits because it is a threat of Mother Nature. On our side of the house, at the very least, you get some degree of control because states have protections against this. Protection is a prerequisite for exercising your autonomy. You need us before you buy any part of Gov's case. Very proud.
All right. Thank you for a wonderful remark. I'd like to invite the DPM whenever ready.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Cool. Let me see. Let me get my timer. Okay. I need to get my timer. I prefer my POIs known verbally. Okay. I want to start with a story a ranger told me when I was in Australia to show the level of ignorance that opening opposition have. He was talking with an Aboriginal leader, and at some point he was saying, we shouldn't bring out these tools because I think it will rain in 5 days. The ranger looked at his meteorology things, people who use the newest tech that we have, the people who have PhD level graduates to be able to detect the weather, and even until 2 days before he said it, there was still no prediction of like rain happening. However, on the day itself, the weather app showed that it was going to rain, and it indeed rained. The reason for this is incredibly simple. If you look at Aboriginal people who are most linked to the idea of having no states, and most likely the best comparison that we can have, they aren't just people who have no system. They have a way to survive, they have a community, and they have a level of help that they can get. Why is this the case? Firstly, I want to note, still you oftentimes have years of evolution where you know oftentimes things that have been happening well. But also you live so close to nature that you're able to really detect what it does. So you're able to better detect where animals are going to or where like the weather is going to go and all that kind of stuff. And I want to note, right, they say, infighting happens because people are inherently moral. Rehan already preempts this, right? It doesn't happen on the arts of the house because you don't want to fight with each other because it's us or everyone together, right? If you fight each other, you're going to die altogether. But also, if you fight another tribe, the chance of someone dying of you, which has done major impacts emotionally for everyone, but also just like generally survival-wise, is so huge that you don't want to do it. It is easier to fight war when it is made by politicians sending out the poor people in the slums where they are not connected to it. I think that is more likely to happen on their side of the house. Now, on the view of ignorance, right? I think the moment that we get the analysis from LO that says, I don't want to walk outside when there is a terrorist because I really care about bad things that's happening to me, extremely shows why you should care about the worst case scenario, and that's why this is the most important thing, right? It is because we are risk adverse by the analysis of OO. But I also want to note, right, that there are a huge amount of people who are living in poverty. A lot of people living in slums. A lot of people are living in war system. Just because we are privileged to live in relatively stable countries does not mean that the majority of people currently don't. But also, behind the veil of ignorance means you also don't know when you're going to be born. It is at some point when there is a state. This includes the Dark Ages. This includes the Hun invasion of the Roman empires. This includes all of that, at which point this increases to a large extent. At that point, it is a genuine risk and a big average, which then is going to screw you over. But I also want to note, right? If you are happy, you tend to be happy on either side anyway. There isn't really that much utility you get from being happy here than over there in that life, and therefore you get kind of like used to it. Whereas when it comes to harm, it is more continuous, it is more harmful, and it entrenches in yourself. And therefore, that is what you should care about, not about the good cases. That is why Rehan's analysis still exists. Now, what they say is, but you have plagues and earthquakes and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, maybe we get earthquakes, but what is the main reason we have now rising water levels, where we have droughts, all that kind of stuff? Climate change, because people keep using the system, keep using nature, exploiting it, and putting CO2 in there because they're just a problem with the tragedy of the commons. I produce more and help more of my people, but it comes at the cost of people in Bangladesh drowning. I am fine with that because I don't know Bangladeshi people, but that means that those people are harmed. That is what the selfishness is about a system that made you not care about these people. But COVID existed because we put so many animals together that disease was going to happen. We put them so full of medication that the moment that they are going through, they are supercharged and are killing millions. Panel, all of the things I talk about get worse under their side of the house. Even if to some extent we can mitigate them, there are still a lot of things that we cannot and also we're not able to do in the past. Now, why do we want to note? I want to note more life in and of itself is not the most important thing. Look at how an elderly care, we think about quality of life is first better than actually extending life. Because ask yourself this, do you want to be 100 years old if that means that you have no friends? The answer to this is no. Why? Because we do not value this in and of itself. We value longer life because it's a tool towards something, a tool towards happiness or meaning and that kind of stuff. So it doesn't matter, even if they prove that you die earlier in this life, it doesn't matter because you still have a more meaningful life, as we're going to explain. Now, why is this the case? I think people in the status quo are trapped. They are alienated from their work, their community, themselves, and meaning. Capitalism has made it in such a way that you are oftentimes not seeing the fruit of your labor. Your end products are alienated from you and put away, and you don't see its impact on society. You are focused on such parts that you oftentimes don't even know what you're doing with, and you don't see it. I think at that point, the alternative is to work together. It is a community feeling. You together are going on the hunt, and you're telling these stories. There are reasons why there are cave paintings of huntings all the time, and religious figurines are spread throughout the places where we know that people stay. It's because they come together, because they're doing this together. They're telling these stories, they're telling these myths, they're creating a community where they feel safe, where you feel together, and all of that kind of stuff. Does that mean that you're going to have the perfect life and nothing goes on with hunting? No, but it means that you can make it a place and you're there together more, because you're also oftentimes alienated from people. Capitalism has made it so that they're dismantling structures of family so that people don't care about themselves, or are going to care about themselves and buy these products instead of actually coping with other people. But also, there are often times that the internet has forced them into loops, right? Yes, TikTok is nice, but gives you meaning. No, it does not. It is a problem. That is the problem. It is that you're oftentimes alienated from things to just buy and consume. And the problem is not just that it alienates you from other people, which is why we see a loneliness epidemic in the status quo, but it alienates you from yourself. Closing opposition, give your PY.
Your PM told us that you're likely to continue to live in some form of tribal structure. Why is it less likely that these structures are going to be exploitative, especially if like some stronger dude can walk up to me, bonk me in the head, and steal all my shit?
I know it's late, but there's a thing called listening to our speeches. We do this, we explain this, and we give you reasons why we're actually going to do this, right? It is that you're significantly closer to you. The fact that the moment that you need to survive with each other, you're going to create the stories. But also the act of creating these stories creates a bond which is strong that we see in the status quo. That is why Aboriginal groups in the status quo are super tight and they mourn really hard when people die. I think that this kind of like shows the level of commitment to each other and the fact that you don't have a lot of Native Americans, for example, fighting each other because again, they don't want to have all of these fights. They want to have this movement of togetherness. But also, why do you alienate yourself? The capitalist form of consumption, that you should consume and buy this kind of stuff, has led to you identifying with these products. The fact that I am changing my clothes all the time, I'm expressing myself through it, has now become essential in life. Meaning that at the moment the fad has faded out, or I'm not buying these new products, I'm feeling like I'm not really myself and I'm not really expressing myself again. Which means that I'm a constant level of consumption and forgetting myself who we are. Panel, let me ask you this. Ask yourself this. When was the last time that you painted for yourself, that you meditated in the fields and you felt one with nature? I think it was never. Why? Because you don't do this. Because you don't do this. But Aboriginal people do this. They have this form of meaning. They are connected to nature, connected to family, connected to themselves. Quote OG.
All right, thank TPMs for a wonderful remark. I'd like to invite the dialogue whenever ready.
All right. Yeah, before I start, thanks everyone. Thanks, Justin, and anyone who's been watching, supporting. This is my last tournament before I leave Malaysia. So it's good to end it on a high note. So yeah, thank you everyone. Okay. Two things here. First, I'll talk about why we better fulfill basic needs and utilitarian outcomes on our side. And secondly, in the case of people feeling vulnerable, how do we help them? What happens here is that basic needs on their side are constantly denied because, as Hobbes said, life in a state of nature is brutish and short. Where infant mortality rates were extremely high, people died from wounds and bruises because of the lack of things like the development of medicine, where weather conditions, things like rain, hailstorm, or hurricanes means even if you have some basic shelter, your ability to predict these things ahead of time and to have the necessary protections against them are limited. Where you also have selfish humans because it's a biological instinct of humans to prioritize self-interest, not a result of the development of society. So it's not the fact that we live in today's world and capitalism that innately makes people more selfish, that people have biological instincts to prioritize themselves at the expense of others if they know that this increases their gratification or long-term protection. So there are many things in the state of nature that screw you over that OG is just very ignorant of. If anyone plays Minecraft, they'll know you die of fall damage, drowning, lots of things. Okay, it's easy to take a crap on social inequality, but even if you're not born in 2024 or not born in a democratic state, the fact is that it's comparatively better. So even if you don't believe you have perfect access to medicine, you don't have perfect access to cheap housing, the fact that it's comparatively more able to be accessed under our side, and we have mechanisms to increase that access to people, makes it one which people are better able to seek these things in the future, even if they don't have them now. We agree with OG that longevity of life isn't the most inherently important thing in the debate, but they don't prove that they have quality either. Even if you have a shorter life or longer life on their side, the fact is that if you're suffering because you don't have new people to meet or because you don't have medication to deal with smaller things that won't kill you but eat away at your health over time are things that they cannot account for because you don't have technology to detect cancer early on into your life. You don't have the technology to detect other forms of things that may hurt you over time, which is why it's going to be bad for you. Now, why is utilitarianism the best thing you would prioritize? Maybe this might be something CG would say that it isn't. The first is that even with the veil of ignorance, people have basic biological needs that are the prerequisite to everything else. So if you're hungry or sick, it's very difficult for you to feel happy or that you have freedom in what you do because you aren't able to live your life out to the best outcome anyways because you're always constrained by the mental anguish of what you're going through. So if you're hungry, you don't have access to food, or you always feel like what is going to happen the next day because you don't have certainty in your life when things are constantly changing in the world around you, then you aren't able to access those things. Number two, people trade off agency and liberty for more utilitarian outcomes all the time. Most people prefer to live in a country with law enforcement, even if that law enforcement may not be perfect, or they still choose to use social media even if Facebook takes your data. The reason for this is because people value utility gained from it, even if the cost towards absolute freedom. already have demonstrated preferences to live in civilization. And the intuitive reason for this is quite simple. There's very little anarchists in the world today, or people who just go out into the state of nature. So this reveals the preference of many people right now to prioritize you living in some structure or some organization rather than just having absolute freedom in society. So the indigenous tribes that do exist don't join official states because they have no knowledge of these states, or they have very strong norms in those cultures from going and joining those states. But on our side, you still are recognized that these states have things, and in recognition of these benefits, you would choose to join those states. Number 3, utilitarianism expands options. Just because your tribe assigns you to hunting deer or collecting water, there's no analysis from Gov to actually explain why that's something you find intrinsically meaningful. Like maybe it's something that you do, but it's something that's so repetitive for the rest of your life. You're never able to explore other things or other forms of self-actualization. So they don't actually assume that the things that you're going to be given are things that you're going to be happy with. In many cases, people feel unhappy because they feel like they may not be able to best fulfill that role very well, or it's not like linked to what they actually enjoy doing. So maybe on their side, you have some role that's delegated to you. You don't explain that goal actually makes you happy. Once again, cutting into their benefits on quality of life. Second issue, what if you're vulnerable? And OG only on the extremes here. You live in a very oppressive state, but suddenly on their side, all the tribes are very benevolent, right? They will treat you like one of their own all the time. There are 3 things here on how we deal with vulnerable people. First, we have better recognition of rights. UN Charter of Human Rights, we have things like recognizing a right against slavery or discrimination based on protected attributes, where people with disabilities are protected officially under the law. We have accommodations for them. But on their side, if you're someone that's born with a physical disability, what use are you to the tribe realistically? You can't go out and be a hunter and gatherer because you're not as strong as someone else. You're an active liability to that tribe. There's no reason for them to want to care for you. Their side's mechanism is that you care for the person because caring for them helps you. But what if the person doesn't help you because you're not fit? And those are the people that are the most vulnerable that we want to protect. Under our side, there's no intrinsic need for you to be a hunter-gatherer or these other things that require very physical strength, which is why on our side it's better that these people have a space that you get to protect them. Number 2, there's change over time, even if states aren't perfect. With democratization, social movements where relative poverty is rapidly decreasing, international attention when states allow things like slums. It isn't perfect, but it's improving. Under the other side, there's no capacity to improve because the short-term 20 years life you have in the jungle is all you ever knew. Number 3, there's ability of people to join different societies. If you don't like the toxicity of corporate banking, go to the countryside and be a farmer or retire. There's lots of ways for you to find other self-actualization in the world. I don't understand why the thing from OG is, if you're unhappy with capitalism, go to the state of nature. No, there's relative degrees of capitalism. If you don't want to be an investment banker, you can take on other jobs that give you more meaning and live in more low-cost areas. Number 2, even if you're trapped in North Korea in the absolute worst case, there are like non-governmental organizations that try to get these people to be refugees and live in other countries safely. So even in the absolute worst case of OG, there's still ways in which people are able to relocate and live better lives. Before that, CG.
What makes you think that the next 30 years are going to look really rosy and really pleasant in the real world?
I think the reason for this is because we have better things like technology, better economic protections over time. But I also don't think that even if there's a little less democratic backsliding, I don't think 30 years from now is like really much worse off than the state of nature 3,000 years ago. So you have to explain that. Again, even if none of these are true, the development of society allows you options for self-actualization. You can find meaning from religion. You can find meaning from social media. Who is OG to decide that social media is a universal bad for you? The point on our side is because of the advent of information and international societies, you are able to find what gives you meaning the most. Under their side, you're locked in towards that tribe. Their claim is people feel terrible because you compare yourself to others when you know life could be better. But realistically, people only benchmark themselves to people who are proximate to them. If you're a poor kid in a Malaysian village, you won't compare yourself to a pop star in Los Angeles, right? Because you realize that that's not an expectation for your community to meet. You may still feel unhappy, but at the very least, your basic needs are met, and there are ways for you to find self-actualization and change your preferences over time if you're not satisfied with your current conditions. But number 2, it's not clear that comparing yourself to others is a harm. If you're someone who's not born with genes that give you physical strength, on their side, you think you're eternally screwed. But on our side, maybe you are poor, but you have hope that one day your business will take off because there are other success stories in the media. You have hope that one day life for you will get better. The problem thing here is that it doesn't have to be true. Even if it's delusion, delulu is the solulu sometimes. At least on our side, you know that there's a greater world for you to actually explore. You can find meaning in life other than just your tribe. For these reasons, you have to oppose.
All right, thank you all for a wonderful remark. I'd like to welcome a member of government to open your cases. Whenever ready.
Ooh. I don't have many shout-outs, but just a shout-out to Whaler, who has been taking a lot of my crap for the last 2 days. And is very stressed out about it as a result. He's a great partner.
NUS, okay.
OG runs an extremely low burden and runs away from the debate in 2 ways. The first is that they forget that this house prefers debate. So you have to compare the motion to the status quo. Therefore, Black Death, Angus Valley Civilization, Genghis Khan, not part of this debate. Second, they forget that we are trying to push our framework of what we value today onto prehistoric individuals. But the problem is, a hunter-gatherer lives in such a fundamentally different time that it's almost epistemically impossible to access what that hunter-gatherer valued, what they actually thought in terms of the present circumstance, whether their experience is something that's congruent that we can even understand to begin with, whether their value system is something that we can relate to begin with, and therefore whether they have a happier life or an unhappier life is not as easy to quantify as OG seems to make it out to be. CG will rise to the challenge and debate the real motion. In fairness, you'll probably fail, but fuck it, we might as well try. I have 2 very simple questions. The first is living a good thing? And the main premise that I have here is that non-experience can sometimes be better than experience and is often better than experience. Note, non-experience is not value bad, but value zero, value neutral. And there are a few reasons why I prefer non-experience. The first is living is quite tiring. It's honestly extremely difficult for you to live a good life, even in a developed country. That is to say, you have obligations to your family. You must think about a lot of things like studying and working and getting a good job and all of that crap. The problem here is that even in the best case scenario, there's so many things that you must think about. You must think about whether you want to cross, like whether you can jaywalk or not, or whether you'll be caught by the police officer, so on and so forth. The reality is that there's so many like individual instances of negative experiences that means that often like the value of being in that society, of being in today's world, is not as high as they claim it to be. But we also know this because of the hedonistic treadmill. That is to say, even if it were true that we have a materially better existence, we know for a fact that we are not much happier than we were 400, 500, 600 years ago in terms of the absolute scale, because humans exist on a hedonistic treadmill. That means that they often just revert back to a base level of like neutrons and protons in their brain that makes them happy or not happy. But then the other thing I'll point out is that if we're all on this hedonistic treadmill, nothing really will make you happy in the long run, right? I.e., there's a lot more suffering, a lot more pain that you're going to go through for not that much happiness that will eventually be long-termist in nature. And there are a lot of ways in which this happiness can be disrupted. A physical disability that turns you from an able-bodied person into a disabled person can often be incredibly debilitating and make you never feel happy for an extreme long period of time. Cancers can really ruin your lives and the lives of your family members. But also, I would suggest that pain aversion in general is just something that's probably a good thing. So if you need to die earlier to avoid more pain, it's not necessarily bad. The reason why I'm saying all of this is because it is true that in prehistoric times, a vast majority of people die in infancy. In all likelihood, you will be one of them, i.e. you have no sentient experience whatsoever. You're never going to know what happened to you. You're going to have no pain, no suffering that you actually can process or experience. I think that's not bad because it's at the very least value neutral in the first place. This, at the very minimum, mitigates a lot of OO's claim because it just demonstrates that the value of your life is not as high as OO places a premium for it to be. The second question I have is, are you actually going to have a good life? And here's where I brought in the idea of what the world is going to look like 20, 30 years from now. Look, I love Tane Rao. So when we were getting fucking pummeled in Euros, I asked him about his job. And his job is basically to work in effective altruism. And the main thing that struck me was that he pointed out there's a pretty good chance we are living in a civilization-ending event right now. This could be climate change. It could be the threat of nuclear war because of Russia, because of increasing escalation of conflict between China and the US. It could even just be due to AI, which we literally cannot control and have no means of control in the status quo anyway. And what the point I'm trying to make here is, if you live in a society like that, where it is extremely unclear what the future will hold, because even within our current framework of life experiences, you don't actually know what 2025 or 2026, 2027, 2030 will look like. That is very unclear to me why you would take the risk of living in this world, knowing that civilization-ending events are right around the corner. The good thing about the veil of ignorance is that you actually know, roughly speaking, what the end of your life is going to be. If OG is correct, that it's about tribalism and you're going to be living, if you survive past infancy, you're going to be living in a relatively tribal community, you're going to be hunter-gathering for your life. Eventually, you might get backstabbed by one of your friends or you might get eaten by a lion. At least I know that that's the experience I'm going to go through. I don't know what degree of pain is going to be inflicted onto me in the event of a civilization-ending event. It could be nuclear war, in which I experience incredible searing pain that could outlast the entirety of my positive experiences before I die. It could be AI, in which case I could be enslaved for the next 40 years under a fucking Skynet system that wants to enslave me. I don't actually know what the future holds. So the difference here is there is a certainty of outcome to prehistoric times. There is no certainty of outcome of the future, and that's why the future is bad. Umar.
So Deon, this is nice, but indigenous people don't run into the mouth of a lion, and we still live in cities instead of running off into the forest. So why do you think the average person will prioritize non-existence over existence?
Because like I said, first of all, the non-existence often relies not on the running into the mouth of a lion, but the fact that you die in infancy. So you literally have no experiences. And even if you were to have these experiences, I think the fact that your life is shorter means that there's less pain that you need to go through. Again, if pain aversion is good, then I think we win the round. The third thing I want to talk about is the notion of agency. And here I want to talk about the idea of why people commit suicide or why people try to escape slavery. Because often their material conditions are actually not bad. They are the exact material conditions that Umar talks about. You live a life where you are fed by your slave owner, or you are materially well off, you have access to Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, etc. But people still decide to commit suicide and they still decide to risk their lives to escape slavery. And that seems to imply to me that agency does matter above the frames that Umar is talking about. I.e., the fact is that laws and obligations constrain you as an individual that makes you unable to access the vast amount of agency you otherwise have. I cannot punch Whaler because he will call the police. I would love to be able to punch Whaler in a cave, for example, where nobody else is looking because Whaler there's no CCTVs anywhere that can report me to the police. And that's the degree of agency that you have on outside of the house. Because insofar as you live in prehistoric times, your ability to access agency and the things that you want to do in life, not knowing, relatively speaking, or how good your life can or cannot be, the agency you have today is something you can more immediately access, which is why you think your life is better in the immediate status quo. That is why CG.
Hello, am I audible and visible?
Yeah, yes to both.
Okay, I feel obligated now. So before I start, shout out to my wonderful teammate Deon, who has been not the greatest, good person over the past 2 days, but hopefully this will be a fun round at the very least. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Here's why CEO misses the debate. Because CEO's argument is premised on the idea that there are higher level pleasures and you get more happiness. Deon's argument tells you two things that immediately frame out CEO. The first is the hedonistic treadmill. That positive experience you face always go back to the mean. This is why happiness has been roughly equivalent over human history. It is not the case that we are happier than people back then. It is probably the case that this is roughly symmetric and not the most important thing in the round. The second thing, which is the more funny response, is that you just live less. So you don't really have the chance to be bored because you probably die earlier. Why is this particularly important? Because Deon tells you that non-existence is value neutral. Birth is worse because of all the effects that he tells you in this speech, all the impacts I'm going to impact in my speech that we don't actually get a response from member op. But the second thing member op tells you is that there are higher level pleasures that you can access. Note that higher order pleasures was an invented concept in the Enlightenment. We are only conditioned to want higher order pleasures because we have been socialized to do so in the status quo over the course of human history. A person who's born in the state of nature doesn't give a fuck about this. They will not think about this. It is not an a priori good in itself, and so you don't actually understand why this is a particularly winning argument in the round. All right, let's go on to OO. OO's main argument here is that people are born in worse situations in the past, and these are necessarily rectifiable or improvable right now. Here's where we take it over OG, because OG only tells you that there's poverty and capitalistic structures lock you into problems. But there are a lot more things that lock you into problems than that. For example, often minorities exist, and before they say there's a small percentage of society, intersectionality proves to you that different forms of minorities actually constitute quite a large amount of the population. Things, for example, like the advent of crippling illnesses. Deon gives you some examples, but the advent of mental illnesses, for example, is a very modern concept that didn't exist in the past and affects quite a large amount of youth right now, and is only looking to improve or increase because of things like technology. The important part of this argument is not that we weigh over, but we prove to you that we close the gap. That oftentimes happiness is not actually that much greater. That life isn't actually that much greater because of your high chance of being born into a situation that's particularly harmful. But this is worse. It's not just that your situation is harmful. It's that you lose agency because of things like laws, things like socioeconomic restrictions, things like obligations. You constantly worry over what is right and what is acceptable. You aren't able to freely do what you want to do because you feel constrained by the structures and systems around you. That's what Deon explains to you in his argument, that if agency is the most important factor, and LO admits to this because it's one of the major factors he says that differentiates the past and the present, you should believe that agency is directly depleted in the status quo. In the past, sure, you can die from a lion, but you had the chance to run into the mouth of a lion. It's a pretty bad choice, but at least you have the agency to opt into a choice in the first place. That's particularly important towards a person. Lastly, we accept OO's mitigation on why the world will improve. Umar spends a large amount of time telling you why things like laws and things like regulations and international organizations will improve. All this is great. But this doesn't outweigh Deon's extension on the world going boom, because there's a high chance that even though laws and regulations improve, the bad things in society outpace the ability for us to improve things. And that's why the harm still accrues in the long term. Now, what is Deon's argument? I realize I turned off video. Yeah, what is Deon's argument? Deon brings to you two major apex that win this round. The first is likelihood. That is to say, there's a higher likelihood that that if you choose to be born in current structures, your life will be worse as compared to a known quantity or a known certainty in the past. Why is this the case? It's because the risks in the future could look significantly worse than anything we can imagine. Things like new developments and crises that you have to live through. Like current global pandemics of a scale of COVID would never have been imagined in the past. If you ask a person in the 1400s, for example, it would likely have been constrained to a region. They would have told you, well, I would choose to live in the present because, you know, the chance that I actually get afflicted by a regional plague is quite small. But the comparative is that with the increased ability for things like plagues and pandemics to spread, suddenly it's not a regional lock thing, it's a global thing. And the same levels of escalation in crisis can occur in any other field. That is to say, our current perceptions limit our ability to imagine how bad the future can be, and human history has proven that things do get worse. In fact, it is the new restrictions to freedoms that Umar tells you that makes things worse. Laws have gotten more comprehensive. Obligations have gotten more extensive. There are more societal things you have to live up to. There are more laws in the penal code and more words inside it that you actually have to abide by. That means that people who live now cannot imagine the levels of restrictions on their agency that are placed upon them in the future. That is epistemically impossible to image, and that risk should be factored into this round. This flips OO's claim on certainty, therefore. What now? I'll prove, as counterintuitive as this sounds, that civilization-ending activities are quite likely. For three reasons. The first is that technological developments are escalating beyond our imagination, oftentimes beyond our ability to regulate. Things, for example, like generative AI and ChatGPT require 1 or 2 years in order for regulation to develop. In that period of time, these softwares have developed to a point in which we are unable to regulate, and we are constantly playing catch-up in a game that we are going to lose. Secondly, the risk of geopolitical and nuclear escalation that in a world that's fraught with tensions in the status quo, that any person who's choosing to make this decision will know about. But the third and most important is climate change. We are racing towards the world going into heat death and the world going into like a bad disaster in the near future. That means that for any person who exists now, who ignores the existence of papers, for example, that say that we are racing towards a future that is unsavable, they are racing towards a future in which our children are not able to survive, you know that there is worry, you know that there is risk, and you want to avoid this risk. OG says that risk aversion is the most important metric in this round, but we actually prove why the risk is something that you should care about. Before I move on, Umar.
So on your side, if happiness diminishes over time, the hunter-gatherer will also become unhappy because there's no alternative. On our side, if you're skinny and weak or you don't like capitalism, you can opt out and become an artist, even if there's climate change in the world, because you have options around you, which we said before.
Yes, but you can't. Okay, sorry. But you can't opt out of civilization-ending events. Even if you choose to be an artist, you are still gonna die from the high temperatures that exist around you. I don't know what to tell you here. But the second thing here is that agency outweighs everything else in this round. Deon gives you the reasons why agency outweighs material conditions. This is admitted by both op benchers because they talk about increasing laws. Therefore, it means that if there's increased constraints on your ability to live your life, that's particularly harmful. Insofar as the outcome is speculative and we have proven that we have muddied the waters whether it's actually better or worse, you might as well have the power to choose what you do. This precedes life, especially since you don't consent to being born in the first place, that you should at least be able to live the short life that you have in whatever ways that you conceive. That is a fundamental part of human existence, to know how you live and to know how you die. I know we're probably taking a fourth in this round, but at least it was funny. Go CG.
All right. Thanks, Whip, for round of tricks. Remark. Finally, I'd like to invite the opposition whip whenever ready.
Cool. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Awesome. Okay, it's late for me. Thank you, everybody. Great round. Let's finish this. I gotta go to sleep. Okay, cool. Okay, POIs in the chat. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. First thing we'll do is engage with the most charitable version of Gov, unlike what opening opposition did. We'll say that living is somewhat positive and that you have some type of guaranteed safety, and that even if, let's say, CG is correct, that you might live shorter lives, but your life is generally quite fulfilling because you live in a okay home with other tribes. Cool. We'll engage with that alternative that, by the way, O never engaged with. Then I'll do 4 pieces of weighing: harm, certainty, happiness, and at the last, agency. Firstly, let's talk about harm. I think that this is the majority of debate where opening government and opening opposition engage in, and the types of harm that you're going to be put through, especially in opening opposition, telling you why tribes often put you through really shitty practices, and opening government telling you about capitalism, hedonistic, modern structures that actively trap you. Closing government also talks about this. The reason that this cannot win the debate is that the probability of that happening is relatively symmetric. So opening opposition and opening government tries to say that suffering happens to you to different degree or different probability, but it's entirely unclear to me the probability of war erupting between tribes is likely to be more likely between countries or the other way around. Then they try to weigh on magnitude, that you're more likely to face worse harms in current civilization versus old civilization. Like, I think maybe OO slightly wins on this, but it's also very murky because it's very hard to measure whether bad experiences that occur can be weighed up, right? Like, it seems to me that fighting a war in Ukraine where your wives, your kids could all of a sudden die under pieces of rocks falling on them versus tribes, you get stabbed. If you're asking me which would I prefer, I don't fucking know. I don't know if rocks dropping me hurts more or things stabbing through me hurts more. It seems to me that bad experiences are just bad all around. It's very hard to weigh up in terms of both probability and magnitude. And if it's the case that bad things happen to us, like steroids, like climate change, and all of these things happen in random chances, as well as humans being fundamentally self-interested and selfish, creating all of these harms, it seems that the probability and magnitude of harm is likely to be relatively symmetric, especially given CG's characterization that you're going to tone your expectation in terms of what hurts you the most. I think that this means that because we cannot measure this, harm is probably not a good weighing metric. The next thing, though, CG wants to measure on is certainty. They say that you have more certainty of what the past looks like, and you have less certainty of what the future looks like, and therefore we should vote for state of nature. Firstly, not sure why state of nature is necessarily historical past. Again, you're unsure if a plague will erupt. Secondly, none of us have lived through the Black Death, so none of us know how terrible it is, how mentally tormenting it is. We might have books to read about, but we would never live through those experiences in the first place. In fact, we probably have more certainty on our side of the house because we have more control over what's happening. We can stop training the AI. We can, fix the ozone, which we did. We can do all of these things that actually increases the feeling of certainty exactly because of things like technology. Most importantly, though, I think the important clash that's actually necessarily weighed in this debate that can actually win this, because it's not about bad experiences that happen to you, is positive experiences that you have access to. At the front of this clash, why should you care about happiness and positive experiences over everything the opening half and closing government talked about? The reason is because if you want to talk about agency, people actually have very little agency when it comes to differentiating preventing themselves from bad experiences, but they have far more agency to adding positive experiences to their lives. So I'm not sure when a war will erupt, but my ability to add positive experiences to my life is quite easy. I just open my laptop, watch YouTube, I call my friend, I see my mom. All of these things are all positive experiences that can add up. Opening government and closing government then wants to say that your happiness cannot add up because that's not how aggregation works. Because presumably when you're pre-primitive, you can actually just like lower your expectation and everything will work out. It's not that mathematical. Happiness doesn't really increase over time. Fucking lie. So obviously increase over time because quality of positive experiences that you previously had and the quantity of positive experiences that you previously had increase. So previously, I love seeing my mom, even in when mobile phone was not invented. If you told me that mobile phone was invented, I could call my mom more now. Surely that's a positive thing because that's just increased the amount of positivity that I had in the past. Secondly, the quality of the positive experiences you've had in the past probably increases as well. So you enjoyed food in the past. Now you're able to enjoy even better food because you have better techniques to develop those foods in the first place. But lastly, you have a greater option, which is in and of itself a positive thing, and it's not value neutral. The reason why is because it allows you to explore what's positive in the first place, which means that even if you're not sure, Judge, what actually is positive, whether getting a mobile phone is positive or not, we are the side that actually allows you to have the freedom to even have the time to decide that in the first place, given that if these things weren't invented in the first place, you would have never developed it in the first place. Then I'm going to respond to the idea that negative experiences might offset this or higher levels of pleasure. But before I go on, opening.
Yeah, if you're dealt the worst hand on both sides, you would choose the state of nature because you don't need to compare yourself to others, so suffering doesn't feel as bad, and you're still able to find meaning in the day-to-day practice of living.
Bro, I don't know. I don't know if suffering feels less bad if you're just fucking inside a rock and it's just on top of you. I think that you're making a very bold argument here. What I do know though is if I get a mobile phone and I can call my mom for 2 more hours, that seems like to be a far more certain positive benefit I could get because I was certain that I had fun the last time I called my mom. Cool. Let's move on. How to access greater higher happiness hierarchy and why that's a good thing. Basically, you have biological needs, you have safety needs, you have increasing needs, and then you're able to access more needs, like I said, of mobile phone technology, cognitive needs, aesthetic needs, and self-actualization better on our side. The simple gov response is just no, but you're also going to feel worse because you compare yourself, you unlock more complex emotion. Again, not sure why bad experiences or these things actually matter, given the fact that it's very hard to weigh up whether these, it's very hard to weigh up how these are internalized and how frequent these happen to you. But you have the greatest control to adding positive value to your life. So maybe it's true that you feel that's a greater comparison, but you have the active ability to increase happiness and go plus by opening YouTube and watching 4 more hours of funny cooking videos. You can't do that on their side of the house. There's a biological limitation to how much sex you can have, for example, if you live in a state of nature, but on our side, you can access TikTok. And I would say TikTok is a good thing, not just a stupid thing like they say. So if we want to evaluate this from a humanistic framework, why should you necessarily prioritize positive experiences? One, from an average voter perspective, you obviously care more about good outcomes and making lives like positive because people, it's emotionally pleasant to think about good outcome. Any average voter would think that positive experiences is good. Two, there's an optimism bias that instills feelings of control when you are experiencing positive things. This means that you're more likely to remember positive experiences rather than the negative experiences that happened to you in the first place. We increase avenues to positivism we are very proud to oppose.
All right, thank Kavisshnu for a wonderful remark, and thank everyone for this amazing finals. Yeah, judges, let's move to the Discord A1 diversion room for the diversion. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone.